Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Oh, you turned your video off, Lee.
Yeah, I didn't turn it off.
All right. Well, we are working out some technical difficulties, but we're here. We can see you now, Lee, so just don't change anything. To everyone watching, thank you so much for joining us this evening for a conversation with Lee Durkee and Mary Miller to just celebrate the paperback release of Lee's novel, The Last Taxi Driver. My name is Talia. I'm the events manager here at Flyleaf. If you're new to the store, I encourage you to browse our full events calendar by clicking the Flyleaf Books logo above us. I've been busy adding listings to our calendar for the spring and summer seasons, and there are many more to come, so be sure to follow us on Crowdcast so you don't miss anything. I'd also like to invite anybody who's local to Chapel Hill to come visit us this Saturday for Independent Bookstore Day. We're so excited to have a day of celebrating independent business, books, reading. We'll have staff giving recommendations, and there's a special deal from Libro FM where if you spend $15 or more, you'll get a free audiobook. So please come out. We'd love to see all of you there. Also, if you'd like to support Flyleaf and our guests, please keep in mind for this event that The Last Taxi Driver, as well as other books from Mary and Lee, are available from Flyleaf. We are open for browsing, so you can come in and shop in person, or you can click the link below our faces to buy your copies. All right, now I will go ahead and introduce our guest tonight. Lee Durkee is the author of the novels The Last Taxi Driver and Brides of the Midway. His stories and essays have appeared in Harper's Magazine, Oxford American, Tin House, and many other venues. Due to publish later this year, Lee's memoir, Stalking Shakespeare, will chronicle his decade-long obsession with trying to find lost portraits of William Shakespeare. A former cab driver, he lives in North Mississippi. Welcome, Lee.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here at Flyleaf Books in spite of the technical difficulties I brought with me that seem to follow me through life, I have to add. And thank you, Mary, for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. Mary Miller is the author of 2 collections of short stories and 2 novels, most recently Biloxi. Her stories have appeared in the Paris Review, Pushcart Prize 2020, American Short Fiction, and the Best of McSweeney's, among many others. Welcome, Mary.
Yes, hey, how are y'all?
Thank you both so much for joining us. To keep the focus on the 2 of you, I'm going to minimize my screen or my video and audio to let you talk to each other about the book and your work. If anybody watching thinks of a question you'd like to ask either of our guests, you can leave it in the chat or use the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of your screen, and I'll pop back up at the end of the event to read those questions out loud to our guests. So Lee, why don't you kick us off by introducing the book?
Okay, I will happily. And thank you, Mary, for doing this. Also, Mary and I live in the same town, but we never get to see each other because of the pandemic. I'm going to start off by reading a small chapter from the book. It's only going to take about 5 minutes, I think. The book itself is about the day shift cab driving, which is very different than driving a cab at night. In the day shift, you're taking people to work, and there's a lot of pressure on you to get them there on time or they will be fired. So it's not very, at night, you're just taking people to bars, picking them up from bars, which has its own obstacles. But the day shift driving is very different, and you're an important part of the community. You're dealing with a lot of the same people every day, and you get to know your customers pretty well. And if you're driving 70 hours a week, which is what I tended to do, they're pretty much your only friends because as soon as you get home, you just go to sleep. So I tried to write a novel in which I could fit as much of the actual weirdness as I could into a book from real life. And I tried to fit it into one day-long shift. And I was ultimately unsuccessful with that and ended up being a shift and a half. But it's still pretty quick, and I think it's a fairly quick read even. I'm going to start with the opening chapter and just read a few paragraphs of that. It's called Opposite Earl. They never tell you what you were in for. They never tell you what they were in for, only that they just got out. This one's a handsome white dude, mid-30s, a few missing teeth, a few prison tats, who's in a fantastic mood. He's carrying a 12-pack of Bud Light when he slides into the back of my town car and tells me he's just been released from Parchman Prison, and then gives me the name of some street in the Bethune Woods project. Says it's an old girlfriend's house. Man, is she going to be surprised to see me, he adds. We're at the mobile station near West Gentry Loop waiting to pull into traffic. Maybe you should call her first, I suggest to the rear view. Man, I don't even know her number, been so long. She's probably married, divorced twice. We hit the 4-lane and head east towards the largest of the 5 projects I didn't know existed before I started driving a cab. These projects are arranged like black moons around a white planet, and it's my job to ferry kitchen workers from these projects into the square at $20 book-in on a job that pays them maybe $9 an hour. It's late spring, mid-afternoon, as I drive under the Fordyce Bridge past campus. As I do this, I'm wondering if Uber will steal all my rides from the projects. I've never used an Uber and don't understand how that works, but my hope is that when they come into town next month, it's not just a rumor anymore. Uber will shun the projects the same way all the other cab companies in town do. Bethune Woods is one of the nicer projects. It has a suburban facade filled with the evilest speed bumps in town, fronting the grim row of public housing apartments. Damn, my fare says as the Lincoln bottoms out over the speed bump. You get used to it, I tell him. Is it yours, he asks. Nah, I tell him, company car. I get to keep it at my house. I mean, as long as I put in my 70 a week, I do. 70 hours, he says. Man, that sounds kind of dangerous. I laugh and tell him that I know guys who drive 90. Our destination turns out to be a beater house. Somebody has stolen the garage door, and a plastic wave of kid junk is cresting into the driveway. The lawn is that bright green ryegrass with brown jigsaw pieces where somebody sprayed ant poison. The one catalpa tree is either blighted or a late bloomer. No cars, all the lights off. Man, can you wait here a minute? I'm just going to look-see inside. Leaving his beers on the floorboard, he rings the bell and waits, combs his hair back with his fingers, then knocks and waits some more. Finally, after glancing back at me, he wanders into the garage, pokes around in there, and then opens the side door and disappears into the house. I sit there thinking, well, I didn't see that coming. And once again, I find myself wondering what makes an accomplice an accomplice. At what moment do you stop being a taxi driver and start being a getaway driver? But I don't leave, not yet. For one thing, I haven't been paid. Also, I happen to like the guy. He looks like a discarded version of my friend Earl, who hustles golf for fun. This guy is like Earl's prison twin. Rich Earl, poor Earl. The Earl who owns nothing and has lost a few teeth in Parchman. Same year, same model, opposite fates. I'm going to stop there and hopefully rally from all my technical difficulties.
No, you're doing great. Yeah, I've been rereading the book today. And of course, I think I read like a really early draft while you were still in the process of writing it. And then maybe a draft when you were finished. And then I read the book when it came out. And yeah.
Oh my God.
But just revisiting today, it's still just as fun as it ever was. Like, I don't know. It's just so readable. And it is so fast, too. And I think the opening, opposite Earl, it's just the perfect way to get the reader into the story. And so you've probably answered this a million times, but did you always know that that would be the first piece? Like,
oh.
Earl?
I don't know. I'm assuming you might have told me to make it the first piece. I don't know. I mean, I send my stuff to Mary, and Mary sometimes sends her stuff to me to read ahead of time. So she had a lot of input on this novel and helped it out tremendously. As to that first part, I think it's just when I first started writing the novel, when I finally quit driving a cab and started driving for Uber instead. I finally had time to write again, and the novel just kind of poured out of me. I wrote it really quickly, and I think that just instinctively, that was my first scene. That was the starting point. But I don't remember the decision process. And I don't remember anybody suggesting another place to start. That was
Yeah.
a tough question.
Huh?
All your questions going to be that tough?
No. So,
Softballs.
okay. So a softball. One thing I've been wondering that I haven't talked to you about is just, I mean, you drove a cab in Oxford, Mississippi. You've renamed the town Gentry, and you've renamed everything, like, even that bridge. That's not really the Fordyce Bridge, is it? Like, it's renamed. Is that correct?
Right. I named every street after a racist.
Yeah. So have you received any pushback from people, or not that you could receive pushback from places, but like, yeah, has anybody contacted you and like, this is I don't know, giving you a hard time?
No, knock on presswood. That has not happened. And I haven't got sucker punched or yelled at or anything. A friend of mine once told me that people don't recognize themselves in fiction, and I wonder if there's some truth to that. But I've got a couple of calls from cab drivers I worked with, and that of course terrified me when they identified themselves. And I thought, oh my God, here we go. And they just called to say they liked the book, so that
Right.
was an incredible relief. Yeah.
Well, that's
And
awesome.
but since both my cab companies I worked for were driven out of business by Uber, most of the people I worked with just disappeared from my life. I don't know what became of them. For the most part, I do not run into the people who helped influence this book. Um, a lot of, I think it's easy to think that a character in a book, and you know this better than anybody probably, is the person in your book is not the same person in real life, because you put in 500 drafts in between your first draft and the time it's over. And the character evolves and gets layered and layered and layered and becomes a creature of plot at some point. So, and I think you probably do this to some extent too, but I'm not sure. I combined characters to create characters. Like I can look at certain characters in this book and there'll be composites of 2 or 3 friends of mine, and I can recognize exactly what people. Were you like that as well? I assume you.
Well, I feel like I don't do that as much, although I don't know. It's something I usually encourage my students to do when there are just too many characters in a story. And I'm like, all right, I'm distracted by all of these people you're introducing. Why don't you combine some of them? But I don't know. I generally just don't shove that many people into a story. So, but yeah, I agree with you that even when I'm writing stuff that's really heavily based on my life, I'll like almost never received any sort of like pushback, except from maybe my family members. My sister has forbidden me to ever write about her, like not another word. Yeah, and I'm like, I wrote that story like 15 years ago. Let it go, man. But yeah, I think it's people don't recognize themselves, people don't read, and
Yes.
they do recognize themselves. I've like put together relationships like back in order from the story I wrote about them. Like one time I had a total falling out with this person. I wrote this, what I just thought was a scathing, like just, just a I'm mad story. And yeah, we ended up just like repairing our friendship over it, which was
Wow, that's lucky.
bizarre. Yeah.
That beats getting sued.
Yes, every time.
Right. So we're autofiction, is what people call what we write.
I mean, yeah, but I mean, I've written things that I do feel like I wrote a novel from the perspective of a 63-year-old retiree, a man. I mean, there was a lot of truth in that,
Yeah,
but I'm not a 63-year-old man.
yeah, that's true. You did, and it's a brilliant novel, Biloxi. Highly, highly recommend it. But it's not necessarily typical of your. It was a deviation from your work in some way, when you think.
Well, yeah, certainly from the short stories. I mean, my short stories generally are kind of at least sparked by a real life event or something that, someone or something related to, my life.
Do you think of us as kind of creatures of a lesser god because of that? Like in the hierarchy of writers, we're sort of lower down because we're like auto fiction. Is that, and I don't like that term. I hate it.
I mean, you still have to like shape and tell a story and use all of the craft elements and all of the techniques that you would to write any story, even if you were just like totally basing something on research. I don't know. I just feel like, I don't need to write a story I don't know anything about by people I don't know anything about. Let those other people do that. And tell it a lot better than I ever could. And I can tell like the stories that I know from the perspective that I know. Yeah, I don't think, And we still, we're just like typing up things and then sending it off like we're geniuses. No, it's still like craft.
I was thinking forever about writing. I always wanted to write about an actor or a director doing a Shakespearean play. And I always had in my back of my mind that would be something I wanted to do one day, even though I have no background in directing a play and being an actor or anything like that. So in a sense, it's presumptuous, but writing is a presumptuous activity. And then I read a book recently by Ethan Hawke, who is acted on Broadway in Shakespeare, and it is about a guy acting in a Shakespearean play. And reading it just kind of made me realize I had no business writing that novel or thinking about writing that novel in the first place, because I had no real experience in that world. And it kind of humbled me and made me realize that the ambition to try to do something like that might be a wrong direction.
Well, you do know a lot about Shakespeare, and I think you could, start like, going to plays and talking to directors. I mean, I can see a way that you would write that story very well, but you would have to do a lot of research and stuff and like really get into the world. Otherwise, I don't know, it just wouldn't feel true. And people who knew anything about it would be like, what is he talking about here? Well, let's deviate. So I know you lived in Vermont for like, was it almost 20 years? And have you ever written anything set in Vermont?
Yeah, unfortunately I have, but I've never been able to publish anything I've ever written about Vermont until this memoir I have coming out next year. Part of it takes place in Vermont. So I've had a lot of frustrating attempts to get published with my Vermont material. And I don't know why that is. I don't know why the only two novels I've published have both been set in Mississippi. It seems more than a coincidence. And I've written two novels, well, a novel and a memoir that was set in Kathmandu, Nepal. And I couldn't get those published either. At one point, you set me up with an agent for one of for the novel that was in Nepal.
Yeah, that was a great
nobody
novel.
wanted that. And I kept getting one of the rejection letters, the nicer ones I got back. The person said, "I wish this was set somewhere else, somewhere in America." And I thought, I grew up at a time and age when, I thought of writers as world travelers, people who would bring back the world to you. But that was pre-internet, and maybe books don't serve that purpose anymore. I know they used to. There is no frigate like a book, Emily Dickinson said, right? But now there's a lot better frigates than books. There's YouTube. And I wonder if by trying to write about exotic ports, I really hurt my career for a long time, because I could get none of that stuff published, none of the Vermont stuff. And then I wrote one other book about Mississippi, and I was back in print.
Yeah.
So,
Huh. Well, that is strange because yeah, I read that Nepal novel and really liked it and did try to hook you up with my agent and um but yeah, I don't know. There's something about just the place you grew up and spent your childhood that will never leave you. I mean, I lived in Texas for about 4 years and I do write a bunch of stories and stuff that are set in Texas. But it's still, I don't know, regionally close enough, to sort of to Mississippi. I mean, there are surely lots of differences, but it's not Nepal.
yeah, but you've never gone through a period in your life when you couldn't get anything published and had to like rethink everything, have you? You've been pretty much steady Eddie your
Um,
whole life. I mean, you've got
yeah, maybe, but not
The
really.
Last Days of California, right? It was not your first book. Your first book was the awesome Big World short stories. Can you get that in there? And these are collector's items these days. Everything's backwards.
Just
You also always happy hour. So have you ever gone through a dry spell?
Well, I feel like, kind of now I don't have, I am writing, but yeah, I don't have any big project. And yeah, I don't know, bit of a dry spell now. But I feel like as long as I'm writing steadily, dry or not, I don't know, it doesn't feel bad. It only feels bad when you're a writer who's not writing and you're just kicking yourself all the time. And we've had that conversation a million times because I'm often a writer who's not writing. Just because I tend to work in spurts and I tend to like get a project and like be like the way you wrote The Last Taxi Driver, it was just, and you can feel it too, the energy that it was written like in a frenzy. Like there's so much energy to the prose. And I can tell too that you were having fun writing it. Like it just, I mean, didn't you have a great time writing this book? It feels like you did.
I don't. Yeah, I did. I had fun writing it, which is kind of ironic because it's one of the most depressing books ever written. If it's, in some ways, unless it's either very funny or it's a terrible book. Yeah, I think one or the other. If you read it and you don't get the humor in it, then I
Yeah.
don't think you'll enjoy it. Um, it was fun to write because it was funny and it was part of my life, and it was easy to write because it just came pouring out. But it's only fun to write something so many drafts, and the whole publishing process
Yeah.
tends to take the fun out of that in general. But I found myself still liking the material even at the last phases, the copy editing and all that. So that was real encouraging.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, yeah, revision is the tedious part. Right now, I'm reading all of my students' revisions for finals. And yeah, I don't know. Revision's just really hard. It's hard to have perspective and to know if you're just not making something worse. So, anyway, you're talking about comedy. And so, Bill Hicks is a thread that goes through the book. And just, he's buried in Greene County, which is where your family's from. And I don't know, like in reviews I've read and even just like looking at things you've done, like are people mentioning Bill Hicks very much? Is it something that you've been asked to talk about?
it comes up definitely. He's got a cult following. I think a lot of people don't know who Bill Hicks was, but he was a comedian who died pretty young, and as comedians go, he had risque material, and he also took on conspiracy theories and a lot of overlap in interest between him and myself. And so he was also from the South. He was raised in Texas, and he was raised in the suburbs. I'm not by any means at all a backwoods Southerner. I've never been to deer camp. I've never shot an animal aside from a possum. And Bill Hicks was from my world.
Yeah.
So when he did his routine, I related to him. And I think a lot of, my generation from, suburban white Mississippi were very influenced by his sense of humor. So I wanted to put him in the book. But it was also by accident. It's everything you write isn't orchestrated. I happened to be obsessing with Bill Hicks on YouTube when I started writing the novel, and he just kind of worked his way into it in that way. It wasn't thought out or premeditated.
Yeah. Isn't that so often how it happens? That 10-minute play I wrote, I just watched like Tom Hanks's The Money Pit, and somehow it worked its way into my play. It's like, I don't love The Money Pit. The Money Pit really means nothing to me. And it became sort of like this overarching theme, weirdly. But yeah.
That was a really good play, by the way. I'm going to write a play too, I think.
Yeah.
We have a friend in town who she directs a number of one-act plays every year. Mary's was brilliant. And they filmed Mary's recently. So where is that going to be available?
Well, so I think, it wasn't in person. So they just had it at the drive-in, I believe on Sunday. I didn't go because we went and watched it being filmed. But yeah, I think it was just the one night at the drive-in. That's COVID world, though. So you did eventually, you went and visited his grave, right?
No, I still haven't visited his grave.
You've just been thinking about it for like 10 years.
I know, I've been putting it off. It's not the most fun thing to do. And of course, it'll be anticlimactic, like most things. But I am about to go on an actual vacation. So I'm going to drive down in that direction. A friend of mine from Vermont is coming down to visit, and then we're heading south to New Orleans. So we're going to go by that area, and we might drop by and finally visit Bill Hicks's grave.
Yeah.
We also thinking about the Leonard Skinner crash site, which now has a memorial. And there's also a new memorial for the Pascagoula UFO abduction site.
Oh, really?
So I'm thinking about maybe we'll stop in all three of those and visit the esoteric tour of Mississippi.
Where's the crash site? The Leonard Skinner crash site? Like on the coast?
That's near Macomb.
Okay.
Just outside of Macomb.
Huh. Didn't even know it was here. Well, that sounds like a fun trip. Those are, what other sites are there? Although, I don't know. Yeah, there's so many things just in this state that I've been meaning to do for years and haven't quite gotten there.
Yeah, I know less about Mississippi than any Mississippi writer in history, I think, sometimes.
What do you mean?
Well, I was away from it for so long. I mean, I was away from Mississippi for like 35 years.
It changes at a glacial pace.
Yeah, but my memory's not so good. So when I came back, people like made fun of me because I had been to so few places in Mississippi. And I didn't know New Orleans, which was apparently unforgivable.
Yeah.
Everybody in Oxford knows New Orleans inside out, right? And I hadn't been to New Orleans since I was a kid, so I always felt like an imposter when I moved back to Mississippi. And in Japan, you've been away for too long. In Japan, they call you a gaijin, which means you're from Japan, but you've been away for too long, and you've come back and you're not trustworthy. And I always felt like that in Mississippi.
Huh. Well, and there is some of that in the novel. Like, yeah, is it Earl who's just like comments, or a number of people comment on your accent, or or lack of accent? Yeah.
Yeah, but I've really never had an accent. I was raised in Mississippi from first grade up until past high school. I went to a couple of years of college, and yet I never had much of an accent. And I think the reason was because my dad was from upstate New York, but it could also be that I was born half deaf, and so I don't pick up on the accents that well. Maybe I don't have an accent because of that. I have no idea, but I never really had an accent. And yeah, I get a lot of grief about that now that I've come back. And some people are disappointed because they want me to have an accent, and I don't. You have an awesome accent, but you have a very recognizable accent to me because it's more southern Mississippi, which is very different than the Oxford accent.
Huh, interesting.
Can you not tell them apart? I can identify South Mississippi accents like that.
Really? No, I can't. I only feel like I can tell somebody's accent if it's just, just really thick. Just because your ear's attuned to hearing, the variations that all of your friends have, and so everything's sort of normal. But yeah, so it only stands out to me if it's just really pronounced. Um, all right, should we take another little deviation? Oh, I do want to mention, so your Italian edition was just published as well, along with the paperback here in the US. And we do have the same Italian publisher, and we love them.
We do, yeah. Black Coffee, they're the best.
Who translated yours? Was it Sarah or Leonardo? Do you know?
I'm afraid I don't know, Mary.
Okay.
I didn't have any interaction with my Italian translator. My French translator was emailing me a lot, and but the Italian translator didn't contact me that way. So I really, I'm not sure, and I feel bad not answering that question.
Well, that was my experience too. I remember emailing Sarah being like, "Well, don't you have a lot of questions?" And she was like, "Oh no, I can intuit things. I get the gist of it." But then I remember when the Germans first translated The Last Days of California. I am not kidding you. When I got like 17 pages of questions, and then 3 or 4 more, like 5 or, I mean, it was insane. It was like, what's a loaded baked potato? What's the rebel flag? What's a ponytail holder? And I was just like, do they not have Google? This might get me in trouble, but so just the difference between the German translation and the Italian, I was confused by, because I was like, they don't have questions? Like, don't you want me to answer questions? I'm prepared to do that.
And the whole, you're used to being translated, and you've been translated all over the world. It's a new experience for me.
German and Italian. Those are the multiple books in, German and Italian, but those are the only ones.
Well, it's a strange thing to happen, especially during a pandemic. If you publish a book during a pandemic, it turns out it's a very surreal experience where it only seems to actually be happening on the internet. You can go online and become convinced you've published a book, but there's nothing to support it outside. And the idea of a book coming out in Italy just doesn't seem possible to me. I recognize a lot of people are telling me it's actually happening, but part of me just doesn't believe it. And it's almost too good to be true.
Well, you'll get a copy in the mail soon. And the cover is brilliant. I really like, the more I look at it, the more I like it. It's just so visually interesting.
I love the cover. I wish I had one to show it right now, but it's a collage they made by putting all my taxi cab customers into one person, who is the driver, Lou. And it's just, describing it that way doesn't do it justice. It's a fantastic cover, but we've both been lucky with covers.
Yeah.
You've been phenomenally lucky with covers. I mean, starting with, I'm going to hold this up again. Big World. You can see how small it is. It's a book you can put in your pocket, literally, but it's beautiful. And it's a fantastic book of stories as well. But the job they did on it is incredible. And then you have Always Happy Hour, which
that is a great cover. So
is maybe the best cover ever. Yeah.
So yeah, Lee Price is a New York City painter, and it looks like a photograph, but it's a painting, and her work is amazing. And I reached out to her after that came out and was just like, thank you so much for your brilliant work. And of course I didn't do anything, but I just was bored by her work.
It's so arbitrary, and it can be so devastating if you get a bad cover. And I've had one bad cover, at least one I didn't like earlier in life. And it's just a gut punch, but there's nothing you can do about it. And it's kind of like having a child you don't like as much as you want to in some ways, You
can push back. I've pushed back with some success before, but we're just I don't know, we're non-confrontational sorts of people. We don't want to, and we also are just like, thank you. But I mean, I think you've got to create a stink if you really, really don't like something, and it has to be done immediately, you know. But yeah.
Yeah, I had no complaints this time.
Yeah.
Working in the house and the art department there, they're amazing.
Well, let me
Um,
ask you, because both my hardcovers and my paperbacks of my last 3 books have used the same cover, the cover art. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if that's typical of, I'm with Live Right, which is a Norton imprint. But yeah, none of them changed from hardcover to paperback. And you got like 2 just beautiful covers for the hardcover and the paperback. And I don't know, is that standard with Tin House or?
yeah, they switched from hardcover to paper. First of all, they put most of their books only come out in paperback. So I was fortunate to be selected to come out in hardback and paperback.
Okay.
But I think like 85% of their books come straight into paperback. But they do switch the covers, as far as I've been able to tell,
Yeah.
from hardback to paperback.
That's fun. I like it.
Paperback just came out, and it's
Good.
just blew me away. And it's very different than the hardback too. But
Yeah.
and this is the kind of work they do. They say you're not supposed to judge a book by its cover, but I want people to judge my books by the covers.
I love too that they use the same like colors, and I don't know, they look similar enough and yet different. I don't know. It's really, yeah, really smart what they did.
And Tin House, we'll move on from our covers soon, I hope. But
Okay.
they also did this. Like you take the cover off, and there is a gold, air freshener and the hardback, and that kind of. They don't have to do that. It's just classy thing to do, and they do it for the writers, I think, more than anybody, more for the readers.
Well,
So,
Lee, I feel like I've asked a lot of the questions I wanted to talk about. I mean, we've kind of covered publishing in a pandemic, which I imagine is much harder if you've been 20 years without a book published. But I don't know, is there something you want to talk about or?
we could talk. Well, how about you tell me about what's going on with the novel in progress? Mary wrote the pandemic novel years ago, and it's set on an island off of Mississippi, and this was before anybody knew what COVID was. It was pandemic survivors, women who were carriers who had been herded to this island, and it's a novel I've been reading off and on for years now, and have been championing. I think it's fantastic, but I haven't seen or heard anything from it recently. What's going on with that novel?
So I don't know. I just work on it like in spurts. I was working on it, I think maybe around Christmas. And yeah, it's still not finished. I'm going to look at it again this summer. I've got like a residency in Piggott, Arkansas, like this Hemingway Pfeiffer residency where I will be, yes, very, very alone in Piggott, Arkansas, for a month. And yeah, that's one of the things I want to get back to and just see. But I feel like, yeah, you're sick of looking at it. My agent's sick of looking at it. Unless they can turn in like a finished, complete draft that I'm happy with, I'm not going to bother anyone with it again. And
Bother me with it again. I loved it, and I haven't seen it in a long time. I mean, I was telling you to write, to maybe think about writing that some more when there were times you had given up on it. It seemed like,
yeah.
but that's just your relationship with writing. You kind of come in and out of stuff more than I do.
I feel like Biloxi, I wrote a draft in 3 months. In The Last Days of California, I wrote a draft in 3 or 4 months. Like if I get it really, I can binge a project, and then of course it takes forever to revise them. But with this one, yeah, it's been a totally different writing experience. It's been off and on for like 6 or 7 years. So anyway.
Well, you can write on it in Hemingway's cabin in Arkansas.
That's right.
That's kind of funny because I was, being the age I am, I was raised a Hemingway disciple, and I've been watching that documentary, and you realize there's so many aspects of Hemingway that are distasteful. and in surviving that. So it's going to be funny to think of you being in the cabin where he wrote.
Well, I think he wrote a bunch of A Farewell to Arms there. And then there's a number of stories that are sort of set in, it's his second wife, Patricia Pfeiffer's family. It's his in-laws that had a farm there, and he'd go quail hunting there. And yeah, I think he wrote a good portion of like A Farewell to Arms there in this little barn, so yeah, I'll have an extra bedroom. I told you can come visit.
I want to. I mean, as distasteful as a lot of the stuff that Hemingway is, I don't like hunting necessarily, and big game hunting horrifies me. But, I've also started rereading A Farewell to Arms because you're going to that cabin, and it is alternately brilliant and terrible. As soon as the romance part starts, it's unreadable almost. And then as soon as that's off the picture, and he's writing about war in Italy, it's brilliant. And it just goes back and forth that way. It's strange.
I'm gonna read it while I'm there, because yeah, I'm mostly a fan of his short stories. But yeah, I plan to read that while I'm there. So Talia, you're back. Hello.
Yes, I'm wondering if y'all are ready to do some audience Q&A. Yeah, we've got a few questions already. So I'll start with this one from Greg, who asks, Lee, can you talk about your forthcoming memoir? Why a memoir and not fiction?
It's coming out in a year. It's called Stalking Shakespeare, and it's a memoir about my really, it's going on two decades now, obsession with trying to find a lost portrait of Shakespeare painted from life. Which has never been found by anybody. And so I'm joining this search, which has been going on forever. A lot of portraits have been found that were temporarily anointed as Shakespeare from life, and then they were debunked. And so as of right now, there is no Shakespeare from life. And I assume that there would be a misidentified portrait somewhere, or a portrait that had been kept in a storehouse for a museum for hundreds of years. That was an unknown courtier that would be Shakespeare, because Shakespeare was mass produced in his life his portraits were mass produced. So I went with this obsession for decades, and it's not a novel because it's absolutely true, and hopefully it's interesting on its own terms, but it is a novel about obsession as much as about Shakespeare. And it's funny. It has more in common with The Last Taxi Driver than you might suspect. It's not some sort of, tribute to my love to Shakespeare or anything like that. It's a novel about an obsession that I really don't understand myself, but that I can't get rid of. And I've always gone back to this search for Shakespeare, even after years after swearing it off. I'll go back and fall off the wagon and dive back into it. And in the process, I've found some portraits that are very much related to Shakespeare, that might be Shakespeare, and that some that I actually think are Shakespeare. And but proving something like that is dubious, and or it's difficult. And so it's not a smoking gun type of book. It's a narrative. And it's hopefully fun to read. It certainly better be funny in the same way that the Taxi Driver book better be funny. And I hope it is. And I finished it 3 days ago, so I'm thrilled with that. I know I only have to do the copy edits. So I'm looking forward to that coming out in about 9 months with Scribner.
What's the date what's the publication date? Do you have it?
I believe it's coming out this coming March.
Okay. That's exciting.
Yeah, super exciting. I have a question here from Jorge, who says, I've had lots of extraordinary experiences learning about cities and cultures from cab drivers. I wonder what you think your passengers might have learned from you.
That's another tough question. They didn't learn patience, I don't think. They might have learned the art of, not kicking them out of the cab for saying racist terms and things like that. The customers in my book are, for the most part, they're eccentrics, which was just the same as in life. I don't know what they what they've learned from me. And it's probably interesting that I never thought about that before. Um, I learned a lot from them, and not all of it was good. Um, but driving a cab is a very chatty experience, especially when you don't want it to be. If you're just tired and trying to get through the end of the day, everybody wants to talk. Um, but I have to admit, anything they may have learned from me, other than where something is located, I could not tell you. I'm stumped.
I'm sure that if you asked them, they would have answers, but that's one of those things that's hard to answer for yourself, I think.
It was. I really, nothing is coming to mind.
I have a question here from Maggie who says, for both of you, what did your experiences as Mississippi expats teach you about your home state, if anything?
Mary, you want to go first on that one?
Well, I think because I really never lived outside of Mississippi until I moved to Austin. And I don't know. So I gained a lot of perspective when I came back. Like, I didn't have any gay friends in Mississippi. And now, like, in Austin, like, from the first day at the Mitchner Center, my best friend was a gay person. I was like, this is amazing. Greg Marshall is on here and he says, woo. But I mean, Mexican food, like other languages, I just lived in this tiny, I feel like, little world with very little perspective. And I think that's the problem with basically society as a whole, that if you never leave your county, you never know what anything else is like. And that people, I don't know. So I feel like I learned like a lifetime's worth of lessons that I was able to bring back. And it was just like, yeah, a lot of perspective. It's not all like it is in this one little place. And you can learn to love and appreciate other things and other people. And eat menudo. I don't know if I'm even saying that right, but I would just go to these Mexican groceries and like have them serve me whatever they were fixing for lunch, and just exploring other places and meeting other people, other customs. It's great.
Similar experiences, but I also, when I was away from Mississippi, I was away for so long that I started projecting where I was onto the world. I spent 20 years in Vermont, which is, in Burlington area, which is very progressive. And I naively assumed the rest of the world was more like Vermont for some reason. I thought this was just how the world was evolving. And that was not, as soon as I moved back to Mississippi, I was really surprised at how little had changed, because Mississippi seemed to me to be exactly the same. Maybe I had changed some inside, but Mississippi had not changed, and it had not been influenced at all by Vermont, it seemed like. So I think, clearly that Vermont perspective influenced the book and influenced the main character. Vermont is sort of keeps coming up with him. Vermont's part of the book. And I can't separate myself anymore from what Vermont taught me about progressive politics. And, I was just a typical Mississippian in so many ways. And this was also, 20, 30 years ago, and when progressive politics was much more obscure. And to go there and to be so out of sync and slowly catch on to what Vermont was trying to teach the world. I always thought Vermont was a pretty remarkable state. I might not have left it if it hadn't been so cold. But then again, nobody really got my jokes in Vermont. So ultimately, my sense of humor was formed in Mississippi. And I think my love of the sense of humor in Mississippi, and also, weirdly enough, my love of the manners in Mississippi brought me home as much as anything. Those were the things I missed the most. The manners, just the general kindness that people will show each other walking down the street, the friendliness, and the fact that people get my jokes. And I don't have to say that was a joke, which is, I lived 20 years in Vermont. saying that was a joke, and nobody laughing.
Wait, why are they humorless? What's going on with
They're
Vermont?
not humorless. It's just a different type of humor. I tend to say the opposite of what I mean very dryly, and Mississippians understand that, and they understand I'm joking. Vermont people are very literal, so if you say the opposite of what you mean, no matter what tone, they tend to take it on face value, which means they probably think you're a monster or something, and you have to say, "Oh, that was a joke," and then you explain how you're from Mississippi, and people say the opposite of what they mean in Mississippi.
Well, Maggie Smith says they don't get her jokes in Wyoming either.
I bet, right? Yeah.
Hey, Maggie.
And Mississippi has a good sense of humor, and whatever its faults, it seems like the more tough times an area goes through, the better its sense of humor by necessity, because a sense of humor is a survival mechanism. So I'm proud of the Mississippi sense of humor, and I'm proud to have grown up, laughing at what I've been taught to laugh at in Mississippi. And there are other aspects of Mississippi you, of course, have to discard. But I like the sense of humor, and I like the manners, the kindness to people on the street. I love all that.
I know there's a lot of good and a lot of bad, and people like us that do have liberal ideas, and that, it's good that we live here. We're not just leaving it behind. Hopefully we're trying to make it better.
No, you're back. So I think we fielded the Mississippi expat question. As well we could, right? We should move on from that.
Sure. I have a question here from Colin who says, Lee, when are you going to write the Tyler Keith biography?
Okay, who is that from, and what was the question again?
It's from Colin, who is actually my coworker at Flyleaf, and he's from Oxford. Oh. And he said, when are you going to write the Tyler Keith biography?
When am I going to write the Tyler Keith biography? Tyler is a local legend, musician, punk rocker who kind of infiltrated my novel in some ways. And it hasn't occurred to me to write the Tyler Keith biography, because Tyler Keith is more than capable of it. He's an excellent writer himself, and he's currently working on a novel, so he'd probably get mad at me if I did that anyway. Tyler, Mary, and I.
Lee, do you remember our UFO track? And it was me and you and Tyler, exactly. And I fictionalized it, and Tyler was in the story.
Yeah, Tyler, Mary, and I went out and tried to find I guess it was the 5 years there's a UFO sighting in my novel toward the end that actually happened in real life in Holly Springs, Mississippi. So Tyler, Mary, and I went back on the 5th year anniversary of it to see if the UFO might reappear. And of course it did not. And we drove around with Tyler filming us. And then Tyler never did anything with the footage at all. I've never seen it. Have you?
No, it was incredibly awkward. The whole experience was just, He was in your little car, and it was a Civic, and he's on the hump in the back seat with the camera literally in our face, inches from our face. It's this is a lot. It's a lot that's happening right now.
And the whole time I was just imagining the scathing story Mary was going to write about it, which you let us off pretty easy.
Well, nothing
make nearly enough.
That was one of the highlights of the year.
Oh, okay. And that was
I think this is the last audience question here from George Singleton, who said, I meant to ask you this 2 nights ago, and no pressure, but what's after Stalking Shakespeare, fiction or memoir?
Oh, fiction is so much more fun to write. Memoir, it's been my experience, is quite difficult to write, and I think it kind of adds to my already considerable neurosis. You're not shielded in memoir, even when you're writing so-called autofiction. you have the shield of fiction standing between you and the reader. When it's a memoir, you're just exposed, and it's really scary feeling at times, especially when you're writing about yourself as an eccentric person. And so I don't have any desire necessarily to write memoir again, but that might just be a reaction to having finished a memoir 3 days ago. Right now, I want to write fiction.
Need a
And
break.
by the way, I just went to my hometown for the first time in 20 years, and all I could think about the whole time I was there was a George Singleton story in which the narrator is really not a narrator. There's somebody giving directions, which is a brilliant way to write a story. And the whole story is just somebody giving directions poorly, which I tend to do. And the directions are infiltrated with what the businesses used to be. So he'll tell you to go to the Walmart, which used to be a Rose's, which used to be a Target, and he sees the whole town via X-ray vision, what everything used to be, and all the layers underneath it. And it was just one of the most brilliant stories I've ever read. And it just infiltrated to me toward the point where I couldn't stop seeing through George Singleton vision the whole time I was in my hometown. All I could think about, yeah, that used to be that, then it was that, then it was that. And there's a sadness to seeing the world that way that also permeates George's vision. So it was very kind of George to do one of these Zoom episodes with me the other day. I very much appreciated that. He's a great, great writer who just published his life work. This is 30 something, 40 years of short stories. You Want More, George Singleton, out from Hub City Press. Just a brilliant collection of short stories. Highly recommended. Every sentence is brilliant and funny.
We were actually just organizing our George Singletons on the bookshelf over there. We had a bookshelf built, and Lucky was like, "I've got this George and this George," and I was like, "Look at this one. This one's signed to me." And yeah. Anyway,
Yeah, we did Flyleaf an event with George earlier this year that I think is still available on our Crowdcast. If you click on Flyleaf Books, you can watch the replay, the video of that event if you're interested. To anyone watching. All right, so last question. This is something I've been asking all of our authors who do events with us recently. Is there anything you want to promote or anything you've been working on? And what are some books that you've read recently and enjoyed or are currently reading?
Oh, I can answer first, Mary, because I see you looking around. Our mutual friend, Melissa Ginsberg, wrote a brilliant novel, The House Uptown. It's her second novel, and it's incredibly different from her first novel. They're both brilliant. But this is a New Orleans novel. It's very nuanced. It's third person, and the third person just allowed Melissa to bring to life characters in a way that I found astounding. It's three central characters around a plot that's crime oriented, but I don't think of it as a crime novel. I think of it more as a Peter Taylor type of approach to literature, to fiction. It just blew me away. Melissa teaches in town, and like me, we've kind of been, not necessarily at the top of the hierarchy in Oxford. There's so many successful writers here, and she's one of the best in town. And I'm really hoping this is a breakthrough novel for her. It's called The House Uptown, and I highly, highly recommend it. Just like I recommend her first novel, Sunset City, which is a much more noir novel than this new one.
So Willie Lawton has a new novel out, and I've read basically everything he's ever done. I haven't read the new one yet, but I'm super excited for it. And yeah. Otherwise, I've just been teaching and have like teaching books, I feel like, on my mind, a lot of which are very good, but yeah, looking forward to some summer reading, and that's going to be the first thing I read.
Yeah. And I'll have one other book I'm going to plug, and there's no reason I should plug it. A friend sent me this as a practical joke. And he said, "Oh, here's Ethan Hawke. He's been out of, he's took him 20 years between novels too." And I just started reading it one day because I figured it would make me feel really smart and talented. And it did not. In many ways, I now consider myself a third-rate Ethan Hawke. Ethan Hawke is a good writer.
Yeah.
And he's written a pretty amazing, funny, bawdy novel about acting in Shakespeare. I highly recommend it.
Well, even his 20-year ago novels were good. Like, I think I read 2 out of 3 of them or something. They were really, really good. And yeah, my brother just told me to watch some movie, or is it a Showtime show that he's doing, that he was like, this new Ethan. And I'm like, guy's brilliant. Like, but maybe, yeah, finally people are recognizing it. He's just not like the Before Sunset guy or whatever.
Right. Yeah. I wanted to hate this novel so much. And it was just it was really humbling because it was so good. And I remember just like hitting points where I was clearly jealous of what he was writing. And I didn't expect that. So good for him. Good for Ethan Hawke.
Well, thanks so much. I love to hear what people are into at the moment. I always think it's so interesting. It's like people watching. All right, so we're about to close out. If you would like to order a copy of The Last Taxi Driver, out now in paperback with an amazing cover, or any other books by Lee and Mary, you can click the link just below our faces or come in and shop with us in person. If you missed some of our conversation tonight, or if you'd like to share it with a friend, you can just refresh the page as soon as we wrap up, and you can watch the whole event video back. And then finally, please do check out our schedule for upcoming events. We've got a lot this season that I'm looking forward to. So thank you everyone for watching, and thank you again, Lee and Mary, for spending your evening with us.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you very much.
See you soon.
Thanks, Mary.
Bye, y'all.
Thanks, Flyleaf.